Well, welcome, gentlemen, to this Wise Crowd's Liberating Structures design call. What we're going to hope to do is to come up with a string of structures to help us address one of our design questions. In the chat, you'll see the link to a doc that we'll be using for the design process as a place to dump all of our thoughts and work through a storyboard together. To kick us off, I guess we will follow the time-honored tradition of making use of impromptu networking to get to know one another and become super good, awesome best friends. I will put 5 minutes plus 60-second kicker on the clock. Enable you guys to also choose rooms and offer the invitation. So, what brings you here today? I think that's a particularly interesting one. So, what brings you into this call, and what would you like to have happen? And with that being said, breakout rooms are open. And so pair up and we'll have a series of one-on-ones to help everybody get settled in. Nick, are you on a phone or something?
Yeah, I am, but I can join. Should I join 1 or 2?
Join 1.
Okay.
And Ilker, I will. Can I send you there? I'm going to send you to join Nick in room 1. And you should see a prompt on your screen that'll let you follow and make friends with Nick. And now I'm recording myself all by myself. So what am I doing here? Yeah, well, I'm geeked out about liberating structures and the learning journey. I have this particular hypothesis about how to help people overcome this sort of the chasm of fear in the liberating structures learning. So by using the Ecocycle, if I put every person starts in gestation in the liberating structures learning journey, and in gestation, we all are unfamiliar with structures. We just don't know that they exist. We've never seen it, never heard it, never tried it before, and they're all brand new to us. At some point, though, you hear about liberating structures, and let's use a very specific example. So you learn about what, so what, now what, and you may have had somebody host you through that structure. Like you may have joined a call, and I, Jeremy, may have shown you how what, so what, now what works. You have used it with my assistance. And so that moves you into the sort of birth stage of your liberating structures learning journey. It then becomes possible for you to move into the maturity stage and to use that structure in relationship to either your own thinking or another person, but to use it yourself, to get your hands dirty. There can be, though, for a lot of people, a really big jump from that. Jeremy showed it to me, to let me go out into the world and use it. That often is accompanied by this sense of, ooh, will I be prepared? Are people going to think I'm stupid? Is it going to go well? Is it going to work? Are they going to like it? Will they think I'm awesome? Or will they think I'm a horrible person? And there could be consequences for me. So in between that birth and maturity phase on the Ecocycle, there's a pretty big chasm of fear to overcome. So it's my hope that this liberating structures, this wise crowds design call can give a very tight coupling between the understanding, the theoretical understanding of a structure and application. So in my ideal fantasy, I would hope that it becomes possible for at least one person in this call to go from, well, there's a question I have, and I'm not sure what structures I could use to address it. And if we could help them go as quick as they can into that maturity phase and say, hey guy, in response to your situation, this is a very appropriate structure. This is the nuts and bolts of it. Why don't you go do some homework and then go try it in response to that situation you've got a question to. So just a really, really tight coupling between base level, theoretical understanding and actually let me get out there and get my hands dirty and apply it. Because that's where the magic happens, right? Is in this maturity phase when we're actually practicing and making use of liberating structures in our day-to-day lives. Not just in these isolated, super warm, awesome spaces that are in the liberating structures community around meetups and whatnot, in these sort of bespoke events separated from our day-to-day work and interactions, but actually like on the work floor in response to that that big announcement to jump in with your team and go through what's so what now what, so you can make sense of what that information is going to mean to you guys as quick as humanly possible. So that's my 2 cents. That's what I'm doing here. That's what I hope people are able to get out of participating in this Wise Crowds design call. And if I had to do this again, I would show you a visual of the Ecocycle, which I guess I could do with yonder screen share. Missed chance, maybe we'll get another chance and I'll do that. So cheers.
Oh, here we are back again.
Shakalaka. So just like that. Welcome back, gents.
Yes.
And let's go like this and do it all over again.
Okay.
Here we go. Yeah, so why does that matter? Why would it be a thing worthy of doing to help people apply and make use of liberating structures? What is Willow eating? Okay. Well, I mean, liberating structures are awesome, of course, as everybody knows. And in particular, there's the most awesome experience I have in using liberating structures is actually in design. It's really great to use them in application and go through this step-by-step process of shared thinking with other people. That is definitely good. But my favorite part of being a liberating structures practitioner is actually the design process in the storyboard, thinking about, hey, how could we how can we design a structured step-by-step process that allows us to go from big, wild, hairy, difficult to deal with situation into like little bite-sized pieces that can make meaningful progress towards on that stuff. So being in the design process is just great, especially with people that also have other liberating structures practitioners. That's my favorite part of liberating structures, is thinking together with people about how we can use the structures to accomplish the stuff we want in the world. Not only is it extraordinarily time effective, as a facilitator, I can usually expect to spend like 3 hours for every 1 hour of workshop delivery in the preparation and planning. But if I'm paired up with somebody who also has a meaningful degree of fluency with liberating structures, that design and planning process shrinks down to as little as 30 minutes per. So for a 1.5 hour workshop, I've planned that in 30 minutes with other liberating structures practitioners, which is just like, you would imagine like 3.5 to 4 hours of planning and prep to 30 minutes, like condenses time in an extraordinary way that feels really rad. It's just super good, awesome vibes. And basically, I just want to spend as much of my life in that mode with as many people as possible. So yeah, and so towards that end, I think helping more people learn just gives me more people to possibly hang out with in that super awesome, extraordinarily practical vibe. Because for real, like in the liberating structure scene and community, this may be, this may come as a shocker, probably not. But liberating structures are still brand new kids on the block, right? Keith and Henri wrote the book in 2013, not that long ago. So in less than 10 years, 5,000 people on the Slack channel have come together as practitioners and learners and users of liberating structures. 5,000 out of 8 billion, still a pretty uber extraordinary minority. So I think it would be rad if we could push that, go from 5,000 to 10 billion. So 10 billion users just would give me a whole lot of surface area to hang out in that super awesome, generative, creative design process. Lots of opportunity space for that. And of course, like earning a living, teaching people liberating structures is the type of jobs that the world desperately needs. Because when we're using liberating structures, we're not destroying the planet or creating horrific externalities. We're just talking to people, and we're talking to people in a way in which tends to regenerate the human spirit. So that's pretty nice. I don't know about you guys.
Hello.
Welcome back.
Yeah.
And for my next trick, let's see. Nick, I need to trade you for Ilker. And ready, set, one more time. What brings you here? What would an awesome call look and feel like? Yeah, so this call is intended as a public good. It's something that creates and brings good things into the world. And generally, all of the action that happens in the liberating structures community falls into this category of public goods. We are creating and manufacturing public goods with each other. doing good work because the world benefits from it being done. And I think there's an extraordinary opportunity. This might be a hard tangent for some of you guys, so my apologies. There's an extraordinary opportunity in the space of funding and rewarding and supporting the creation of those public goods. Whether this particular video and this particular space is a great public good is still yet to be decided. We're still discovering that together. But all of the action that comes from liberating structures user groups, sort of gathering together, practicing liberating structures for each other together, and putting on events, meetups to enable other people to practice and learn how to use liberating structures. These are incredibly extraordinarily high value public goods. I mean, so I'll make the juxtaposition between Scrum and liberating structures, that all of the learning journey, quite frankly, for liberating structures can be done completely free of charge, like calls like this and any of the number of great meetups, which isn't to take anything away from all of the paid opportunities to learn how to use liberating structures. Those are often very valuable, and I've attended many of them. Shout out to Barry and Christiana, the Liberators, Ruben, Ewan, and Nadia with Process Change and Creators Company, as well as Susan and Stefan at Greater Than. I can vouch for all of the products that they've created to help people learn how to make use of these phenomenal tools for shared thinking. The point is, though, that the creation of these public goods is a great thing. And so I spend a lot of my time thinking about how we can not only reward people for their service into this public good that is the Liberating Structures community, but also how we might be able to fund specific public goods in the context of the Liberating Structures community. How might we be able to figure out what public goods we need and how we might be able to fund somebody to do that stuff? Having everybody just do whatever they want, freaking great, creates a lot of adaptation, a lot of diversity in the Liberating Structures ecosystem. There is likely, though, also some work that I think we might all sort of agree, hey, it would be awesome if somebody did that. I mean, we've got these resources in Slack that somebody's got to pay for. As a community, we've got these resources that we put together in the Google Drive. For example, just collating, sorting, and organizing the tooling could be something that we go, this makes my life easier. It would be great for somebody to do that. So that act of service in and for the public good that is the Liberating Structures community could be something that we decide, hey, let's fund that. Let's do, Fisher described it to me as a reverse auction. Like, how much would I pay not to do that? And let's pool those funds so that somebody who is willing to might be either coerced, induced, invited. How about that? Invited to do that work, to create that public good on behalf of us as the Liberating Structures community of practitioners and the world at large, of course, right? Because we are in the world at large. So March 20th, 2022, I'll be hosting a get-together for people that are particularly interested in this idea of funding and rewarding the creation of public goods in the Liberating Structures community. I have a very particular idea about how we might be able to use the Web3 tooling to create a DAO that might be able to build the infrastructure for us to create a commons through the use of an augmented bonding curve in order to create a token and fund the stuff that would be awesome to do. So come hang out March 22nd. The link is in the Liberating Structures community calendar. Welcome back, everybody. I was just talking to myself, so I'm glad that everybody else knows each other. I'm so glad that you're back, though. It's a whole experience. So I guess why don't I share a screen to the doc so that the lovely people on the internet might also have some context of what we're all looking at and talking about. So now that we're all friends, let's try and maybe organize ourselves a little bit. So what you see here is a visual to the liberating structures development phases. So these are the sort of steps on the liberating structures learning journey. And what I'd like to invite everybody on the call to do is to self-assess what step of the learning journey you're on and put that step after your name in Zoom. That may take some doing, Nick, on the mobile, but I'm sure it's possible. And the reason that we're going to do that is so that we might invite ourselves to take up particular membership roles that might be helpful for the context of this call. So for the despairing cynics out there, if you're brand spanking new to liberating structures, what you might be able to do to help us out is to challenge some of our assumptions and sacred cows, to ask those sticky little why questions like, well, wait a minute, why would that work? And couldn't this other thing happen? For the cautious optimists in the house, the people that are familiar with 5 liberating structures or so, they can help us by ensuring that we don't get too presumptive by asking for clarification questions and explanations at every turn. So hold on, wait a minute, you mentioned this and I don't know what that means. Raise your hand, throw something at the screen, flash a red light, however you'd like to help us remember that we're trying to help everybody learn. Rapturous super users, people that are familiar with 15 or more structures, I invite you to step into the teacherly role and to answer the questions that you may have not ever answered out loud before. So if you think you might know the answer, whether it's super strong or stable or absolutely clear and cogent in your brain, just try and step up and explain that stuff so that we can get some fresh voices and everybody can get some reps in and practice. And for the minimalists in the house who have familiarity with a large portion of the liberating structures repertoire, help us out by making space for other people to explain and share their insight and then build on their input as we go forward. So I will go ahead and lead by example by adding my development phase in after my name, and then we can get cooking. All right. And so we're going to be making use of the liberating structures wise crowd, wise crowds. Wise crowds functions very similar to the structure that is Troika. One person will function as the client, bringing us their design brief, and the rest of us will take on the role of consultants. The client will explain their design brief. The consultants will ask the client for clarifying questions. The client will then turn off their webcam and microphone and listen in as the consultants basically, spit raps and chop it up about what structures they would use in response to that design brief and how we might string them together. And then the client will come back in and basically let us know what they take away that is of particular value that they may be able to make use of. We will almost guaranteed not use these time boxes, but they are there should we want to. So that will be the structure that we walk through, and then we're going to use this design storyboard to help us collect and capture our input. So does anybody have a design brief that they want to bring into the call for us to work with today? Nick, Ilker, is there a meeting or a workshop or a session that you have coming up that you'd like to plan and make awesome?
Well, I cannot think of one right now. I'm trying to find one, but I cannot find one right now. I don't have any agenda at the moment. Sorry.
Okay, I could try and give it a go.
All right, not a kid, Nick. Step it
But
up.
so yeah, do you want to run me through, so place, context, do you want to run me through what they actually mean? Then I can try and give you some details.
Yeah, for sure. So for a good design brief, you would give us some sense of what your context is. What's the place your meeting is going to be happening in? You know, is this, you know, whatever your context looked like. My context is often as a Scrum Master, Agile coach in IT software development environments. You know, I'll be either talking within a team or maybe in between many teams, right? This is the general context that a meeting might happen in. The purpose or particular outcome that I'm hoping to accomplish at the end of that meeting, that's kind of our desired end state, our goal. What is it we would like to have happen at the end of that meeting that we want to design for? And then the participants or roles basically refers to who are the people that are required to participate in this meeting or this workshop in order for us to be able to accomplish the goal. So, you know, and that also includes the sort of, you know, logistic details of, well, you know, I've got 15 people, for example, that I can expect to participate in this meeting. We might have an hour in length in order to do that. So that's the basic nuts and bolts of the design brief that we'll be working with.
Cool. Okay, I'll give it a start. So the general place and context, some details there. Working in local government, so quite a large organization, about 6,000 people covering an area of about 1 million residents. Also includes multinational companies, etc., etc. So quite a big local government area by UK standards, I guess. And I am a service designer, but I suppose in this particular aspect, that service design responsibility is shared with kind of project management responsibility. So I'm leading the project in many ways, kind of strategically, as well as design directions and so on. However, I guess a major challenge throughout this project has been encouraging collaboration. I guess the collaborators I've sought to bring in on this project are quite senior, so they're quite time poor, and generally people are very pushed in our sector at the moment with COVID and various other issues. So I guess that's a bit of the context. And we'll be having this meeting, I guess, with approximately 8 external stakeholders. So it'll be primarily myself, maybe 1 or 2 other people supporting me in similar capacities, but with 8 external stakeholders, approximately. And yeah, I think that outcomes are quite clear. So 2 things. First thing would be just generally improving our relationship with them. I think we provide some funding to them, but they don't feel like we're being a very good partner. So we give them a bit of money, but we're not really listening to them. And yeah, it feels like I would guess they would feel a bit unloved at the moment. So one thing is improve the relationship generally, and hopefully this is a chance for us to hear from them and, you know, build rapport and get their input. And then I guess the second outcome would be trying to gain their buy-in for collaboration and greater input. And yeah, is there anything else that I need to say? Any details I've missed?
Clarifying questions, consultants?
What was the trigger for the series of things that you plan to do for the initiative? Was there a particular reason that it occurred right now?
So the wider project or program, I guess, is a spin-off of a project which didn't go so well. So there was a project that didn't go so well. I think we were trying to run before we could walk, and so I re-scoped and briefed this project or program as a result of that. So working in a similar area, but trying to build from an area where we had more influence, rather than trying to kind of do systems change and make other people do stuff before we're leading by example. So I reframed it so that the scope was a bit smaller and it was more about us leading by example before asking others to do things.
So it sounds like there was not a wild success on the previous go. There may have been something that was a bit big, and now you're trying to sort of narrow scope into something that you might be able to sort of turn into more of a success than the last go.
Yeah, and we've already got a strong shape to the kind of scope, brief, direction, etc. And it's not like we're bringing in the stakeholders right at the end. It's just that we've been kind of collaborating with them perhaps one at a time about different fragmented parts. So this would be the first time that all of them are in the room to talk about the whole thing.
Nick, why do you think that you couldn't get their buy-in?
Why do I think I can get their buy-in? As I say, my general feeling is that perhaps they feel a bit hard done by historically, that we weren't a good partner, we weren't listening enough. So sometimes they were apparently, because as I said, we're a very large organization, large local government body, and sometimes parts of our organization would ask them for things, whether it's information or to give presentations or stuff like that. And apparently they did this, but then another part of us would then ask them the same questions or similar questions, and it seemed like we weren't listening and we weren't sharing what we'd asked for. So we weren't acting as kind of one contact point, which is obviously quite frustrating for these stakeholders.
I think what I hear a couple of kind of what could be goals for this meeting. What would you kind of see as the main thing you really want to achieve? So you're improving relations, getting a completer picture of the project, getting people together and discuss it as a whole. Kind of hear some of that stuff. But if you were to choose one thing which you would have achieved at the end of such a meeting, what would you kind of pick here?
Sure. I mean, maybe I was a bit goal orientated and I could go one stage up and try and really speak about outcomes. I guess if there was one thing, I guess it would be that the stakeholders become energized and positive collaborators. I guess I'm kind of cheating because I think if they are that, we have to improve the relationship. So it's kind of 2 for 1 anyway. To get there, you'd have to do things. But yeah, if they were energized, positive collaborators, because that would be a sign that we had a thrive. I think that the problem that we're dealing with has been a bit neglected.
Mhm.
So if we could achieve the stakeholders to be kind of energized, positive collaborators, then it's that kind of situation where it doesn't matter how many problems you have or what the world throws at you, you know you could deal with it. And I feel like that isn't where we're at now. And so every problem just adds to the pile, as it were.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, makes sense. Thank you.
Cool.
You mentioned that you provide some funding, and you mentioned there might be some resentment of the requirement to present or report. Is there a regular, like, standard operating procedure for accountability reporting between your organization and the organizations that you're talking about? Or is that sort of ad hoc?
I feel like it could be done better. I feel like it is. I feel like the typical let me say the core formal reporting is probably very structured, but as I say, the particular sector that these stakeholders work in was highly disrupted by COVID, and it was highly it had changed significantly in recent years, even prior to COVID. And so, yeah, it's great having formal core reporting, but what we really need is a more kind of, ear to the ground kind of thing. We need to be picking up insights. We need to be picking up information and changes a bit quicker, and they might be ad hoc. They might not be things that you knew to report on previously. Jeremy, I'm just thinking, as I mentioned before, I will need to shoot off at 4. So if we do need time to fit in other bits.
We better get to work in order to enable you to hear what we talk about. All right, Nick, well, turn off your camera and mute yourself, and we'll get to work.
Yeah, and even if worse comes to worse, I'm sure I can hear it on the recording.
Ah, for sure.
Cool. Thanks all.
So first go around, if we think about this outcome as stakeholders energized and as positive collaborators, and this necessity to maybe have ear close to ground, what are the structures that come to your mind that might be able to help us get to energized, positive collaborator stakeholders, and how might we string them together?
So there are 2 that immediately come to mind, but I don't think you want to use both of them. So there is the heard, seen, listen. This is what's it called? I think it is.
Heard, seen, respected?
Oh, heard, seen, respected. Yeah. Well, it could be an approach that takes it from unearthing the problems that people faced. So it takes it a little bit from that. The other one is what I need from you. And that takes it from a different approach. And it is more so really focused toward the outcome where you want to be. So indeed, what do we need to do and have in place to make sure that we can collaborate with each other in the right way? I would say use one of them, I would think, and kind of depending, it is a bit hard to judge how big the problems were. It might be better to just do the what do I need from you. But if the problems are really serious, then it might actually be better to do the heard, seen, respected. But that's kind of a judgment call that kind of hard to make based on the information that I have. That's my idea around it.
Cool. And what other structures come up for us in the group?
I might use TRIZ, and in combination with once and for all.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the other one might be Med Tea Cafe. I guess it is still in development, huh?
Yeah. Cool.
That's all.
Chris, improve.
To me, I'm hearing a kind of a fundamental tension between a form of command and control, which relies on getting buy-in, and a form of co-creation, which relies on shared ownership. So I might use the definition of purpose to clarify where the real authentic direction of the change is, because otherwise the suspicion about the change is going to remain. I might even start with not necessarily a liberating structure, or using a liberating structure to get at a retrospective, which is really to say, what about our relationship has been working well and what has been failing, and what should we keep and what should we reinvent? But then to bring that back to, but let's remind ourselves, what is it? Why are we having a relationship? What is this about? And I really like the seen, heard, respected, especially if there's any resentment about things that have happened before. It doesn't have to be about the things that happened. It just has to be about harmonics of the things that happened, so that people recognize that. And that, you know, the whole idea of being better at listening and getting insight earlier is reforming that so that it's framed in the so we can assist, as opposed to so we can control, so we can nurture. And if you get the triangle going of, you know, creating and challenging and coaching instead of being victims and rescuers, and, you know, if you can get to that change, then you have a chance of getting long-term a real serious different formation of how things are going. If you can convince the people to be accountable to each other for enabling progress as opposed to for finishing reports, then, you know, maybe there's something good there. Somewhere in that process, I definitely see a wicked question, like, how can we be reporting at the same time that we're enabling you to help us? How can we report problems without being judged? That it's that, you know, how can we tell you what we need without fearing that you're going to cut us off? It's that kind of, you know, acknowledging that those tensions exist and then building on that. And then in terms of, you already, I think, expressed the idea of leading by example. And in the context of a meeting where liberating structures are being used, that's a really important way of building that out. Things like wicked questions are just honest. And maybe, you know, toward the second half of such a session, or numerous sessions, maybe looking at something like Ecocycle as we've identified things that we're trying to do, and we've identified issues like accountability and reporting, or nurturance and challenge and our relationship, that you could put on the Ecocycle and say, where is that honestly right now? And where do we want it to be? And what steps might be required to get it there? Because it won't all be solved in one meeting. And I just always come back to that, you know, try to avoid getting buy-in, try to get shared ownership, common vocabulary.
Yeah, the thing where you mentioned critical uncertainties, sorry, wicked question, I was moving ahead one step. It immediately also brought me to critical uncertainties as could be an approach to upfront think of certain challenges you might face in that. So, and immediately already discuss, okay, how we're going to deal with that in the future. That could be an approach to defining how collaboration can work in that sense. Kind of thing that actually I need want to add on to what David was saying. And again, I agree with David, this is probably not done in one session. That's for sure.
Sometimes I set up virtual team agreements with the stakeholders. Have you ever tried it? Virtual, as we, some of us are agile coaches or scrum masters, we use team agreements, right? So we might use team agreement sessions, virtual team agreement sessions with our stakeholders as well. And we all commit to that virtual team agreement. And we try to commit it. We try to see what we have in common, what we are going to where we are going to reach, where we are starting, and we evaluate we use some cadences for some intervals. We regain and evaluate our agreements. Are we progressing well, or we need to correct some parts of the agreement? We re-evaluate it, and we see if we are on the right direction or not.
Yeah, so purpose to practice also comes to mind in this idea of team agreements.
Yeah.
It's funny that what jumps out to me as salient is so different as well from what you guys have sort of thrown in so far. If I think about this goal of stakeholders, energized and positive collaborators, then everything in me really goes towards, well, I want to create a strong relational layer between and amongst these participants and myself, so that we have the sense of being on a same team. And so for me, when I think about that goal, the structures that jump out to me are, first and foremost, like impromptu networking. Like, can we just create a lot of interaction between people in this safe space? I really love the idea of heard, seen, and respected. Also, conversation cafe jumps to my mind as really great relationship builders. Appreciative interviews also comes to mind as I really like the aspiration of a possibility. I've been digging into this stuff on clean language from Caitlin Walker and Judy Reese. And I really love this invitation of like, hey, what would you love to see happen? Right? Just throw that at these guys. Like, hey, what would the best case scenario of this collaboration look like for you? And that enable them to tell a story about, for example, of a great collaboration that they've been a part of, so that they can, have the opportunity space to sort of mine and tell those stories and mine that experience. So those are the structures that come to mind. I am mindful that Nick said he's going to have to go, and a lot of these structures we've named, but we haven't really described and sort of unpacked to any meaningful degree.
Yeah, maybe call him back for a second and see where he's his first feedback on this.
Sure. Come back in, Nick. Do you got a moment to give us some initial feedback, and maybe we can keep working for you, even though you'll be gone?
So I pushed back the next meeting till 10 past. So I do have 10 minutes, if that helps. First, I think the first thing to say, regardless of liberating structures, is I've always worked in agencies, consultancies myself, or in-house, but without the support of consultancies. And so going through this experience was very bizarre, like completely original to me, to be on the other side of the table, as it were. And it was really refreshing. I really liked, this is a structure, right? The Wise Crowd. So
yeah, Wise Crowd is a liberating structure. Yeah, you're already in one.
What I really liked was how often, like, there's this idea that consultants go away, chuck stuff in a black box, and then come back with some abstract answer that nobody in-house understands. And in all honesty, I think it's a bit patronizing if you do go that far. But sometimes, even if you're a good consultant, you struggle with bringing people along on the journey. And I feel like this was a fantastic way for me to hear everything and take it in and reflect, but you guys be able to go in your flow. So I really like this structure. Any other feedback? I thought some good points were made, like it will take more than one session to achieve the outcome. I feel like if you've neglected a relationship is perhaps a bit strong, but if your relationship's not ideal, it's going to take time to improve it likely. What else? And yeah, I think David said this idea about what's the reason for changing the approach or narrative. And I think that is a conflicted story within the within ourselves as to why this change has come about and why is it so rapid, and are we just asking them to do stuff, or are we really trying to set a new direction for the relationship? The answer to that is rather complicated, so I won't touch on it here, although I appreciate it would probably be helpful for a better answer from you guys. And then the final thing I wanted to say, because I think that's about 2 minutes, is I was trying to note down what I thought I heard as structures. So I heard, seen, respected, what I need from you, purpose to practice, impromptu networking, and then 2 more. One was something cafe and one was appreciative something.
Yep. So in the doc that is linked in this, there is a list of these different structures. So heard, seen, respected,
Okay.
I heard. What I need from you is a structure. TRIZ is also a structure. Mad Tea Party was mentioned. Conversation Cafe, I think, is the one that you missed.
Yeah.
Wicked Questions came up. The Ecocycle Planning came up. Critical Uncertainties. And I think the other one that you also missed was Appreciative Interviews.
Yeah. I think I've heard of TRIZ before, actually. Don't know why.
It's a fairly popular one to
Anti-patterns, right?
Exactly. How do we fuck shit up? Question as well of clarification, Nick, for this session that you're putting together, how much time do you have for it?
As in the duration of the session?
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't booked it in the calendar yet. I'll come back into work this week and I'll then start looking into that because someone else was away. So if you guys have a suggestion for how long it should be, by all means.
Yeah, that's a hard design, right? From a design perspective, it's hard to design for that. So the constraint of time is actually an enablement for us to actually give you a very concrete recommendation of in this much time, this was what we could condense for you.
Sure. Okay. Well, it sounds like, I mean, if you're saying it takes more than one session, you've listed about 10 structures, then I'm guessing maybe an hour is short. So what if we said, I mean, it could be a half a day if there was a reason for it. But yeah, what if we try to do a 1.5 hour? Let's go for that, because otherwise half a day might be asking too much to, work it out fully. But let's say an hour and a half.
You have to think in terms of what you can get done roughly, because there's a little bit of an improvisational aspect of it. But the questions you're going to deal with is what has gone before, and what do we want out of what's coming in the future, so that you're trying to build shared vocabulary and ownership of the intention of the outcome. Then you're agreeing on what the outcome. So today's conversation is going to get us through what happened before and move us into what we want as characteristics of our relationship going forward. And then the next session might be solidifying that and working toward our first working, what is our first output going to be? And that would maybe end with something like what I need from you, where everybody says, in order for you to help me succeed, this is what I need. Am I asking a question that you can answer? So you're getting more specific, you're getting general at first. What are the characteristics of success? Well, what will that look like? What will it feel like? And you're moving, forward into, okay, as we advance, how do we put that into practice? So you're not putting the cart before the horse and outlining all the reporting requirements before you've agreed on what the characteristics, what is the purpose of those reports?
I think, shall I feed back to that? Is that how we're doing it? So I guess the first thing to say is that the general vibe I'm picking up is that try to separate stuff out and maybe take a step back, and that this session should be more strategic and visionary, and try, like you said, those 2 questions: what's gone on before and what do we want in the future. I feel pressured to not go that far back and that far big. If I was having my own way and there weren't certain other constraints, I do highly value shared buy-in through co-creating a vision, taking a more strategic approach in this kind of situation. I just feel like I'm pressured in many ways that going that far back and taking a whole session to do that would probably receive pushback both internally and might kind of flare up cynicism externally. Not to say that they aren't good ways of overcoming cynicism, you know, turning over a new leaf, just to say like I have reservations. And then the second thing to say is that we don't just want them to report. I was trying to say that historically the relationship had gone kind of, there was still conversation, but essentially it boiled back down to the bare minimum of formalized reporting. And what we actually would like is, I think this is part of the crux of the confusion that I'm reflecting having heard you, is that we don't actually know if we're helping them or they're helping us. Like, that, what's the purpose of this? Because the way we're framing it is, if we do this thing together, it's good for both of us. But I feel like there's an implicit need for one side or the other to budge first, if that makes sense, and say, well, we're trying to help you, so come along, or we need your help, so. And I feel like without that clear proposal or frame, it makes it harder to structure and for the stakeholders to understand what's going on, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, also it depends a little bit indeed how big the grievances are on this. But if it isn't so serious, then you can say, okay, guys, yeah, what happened happened. Let's put it behind us and focus on, okay, how do we want to move forward? So that, like I said, it depends a little bit on indeed the level of frustration and grievances that exist. If that's not too big, then you could probably step over it and say, okay, let's move forward. But yeah, that's indeed a judgment call that more for you to take in that indeed to go that route. So yeah, that's it's all possible. I would say,
yeah, I also think that, and that kind of side of things, because we're such a big organization, when you think of a relationship, you think of this stakeholder and us as a whatever. And it seems like, oh, there's a bilateral, there's one relationship. But because we're a big organization, I think the reality is this stakeholder will have this relationship, this relationship, this relationship, this relationship with us. And there will be some kind of collective balancing. That's how we feel about the relationship. And so that's, I guess, one of the complexities in this situation.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah. Yep, all right. Cool.
Jeremy, I have about 2 minutes left, but like I say, if we can't wrap it up in the time, I'm more than happy for you guys to talk more and I can hear more from a recording or whatever.
Yeah,
don't want to rush you or the process.
Yeah, that sounds rad. I would love to go to take this round of input and what we've already done, what we've already thought, and think about, all right, split the difference, you know, an hour and a half day, 2 hours, what could we put together that might be able to give everybody this sense of not only building relationships, but and thinking strategically, but how are we going to do this shit, right? Which I think there's always a strong desire for.
Yeah, and if I could make one ask, maybe it would be that just in one line at the end of the session, there could be a kind of, if we had less time, I would make this change. And you could say, cut half the activities or whatever. It doesn't, just anything you think is a good idea. And if I had more time, I would make this change. And then even if you don't perfectly lay it out, hopefully I can reach out to someone in the Liberating Structures community and talk this through with them and say, hey, I had this kind of input. Could we kind of bounce around some ideas of, okay, now I want to extend it, what it would look like.
Interesting. This is a nice invitation. I appreciate that, Nick. Thank you.
And the last thing to say is just a massive, massive thank you. This has been definitely a great way of practically learning, but also just a nice experience for being, as I said, on the other side of the table and trying out a structure for real. So yeah,
Righteous.
That was great.
Thumbs up, man.
Cheers. I'll be in touch with you all, and yeah, thanks again.
All right.
Safe travels.
Good luck. Have a nice day.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
I like this idea of more time, less time, thinking in that spectrum. Right? So, all right. So let's as a baseline, right? We've spitballed a lot of different stuff that we might be able to do. If we had a 2-hour session to sort of land on this activation of stakeholders as positive collaborators, maybe clearing the air, maybe developing this relational field. What might be some plausible strings of these structures that you think, yeah, this could be a good way of weaving things together to sort of get us towards these goals? Does anything come to mind?
Well, I think your emphasis on impromptu networking or conversation cafe is kind of like, what network do we need to build and what conversation do we need to have? And not having that come from the center, but having that come from the network. So anything that frees that up and allows topics to surface seems like a good idea to me, and builds connections and intimacy, as you suggested. So that seems important. The agreement on purpose, maybe after that, so that you have a little bit of connection and you've talked a little bit about what the challenges are. And then, moving, I like agreement certainty for some reason. That seems, or the purpose to practice is really good if you can get to that. That seems if you got enough time, but I don't know if 2 hours is enough to do that one. And then the very last thing is, maybe if it's going to be the only meeting, then it might be what, so what, now what, or 15%. But if you're going to have if you have another crack at it, maybe try to get to what I need from you. That's another one that I just think it would take a little bit too long. But getting people on the network to be able to ask good questions of each other, that is a good skill for this situation.
Yeah. Checking it. Purpose practice is 2 hours on its own. I've never really done that one.
I take the point about not going backwards and getting stuck in the past, but then I think if you're making assumptions, I heard two big assumptions. One is that we know why it went wrong, and we'll get stuck talking about it, which seems contradictory to me and worth digging into. And likewise with we think it's a win-win for both sides. Like, are there only two sides? And isn't there a big assumption about what a win would be then? And getting that on the table. What is a win? Why do we think it's a win? Is that why you think it's a win too? Or are we agreeing about that? Because if you agree on that, then that enables all kinds of planning and action and criteria and, pictures of what success will look like and how you'll measure it.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the idea of indeed checking those assumptions, because I think that maybe they're true. That could for be not working in their organization. So, but checking those assumptions is a good idea, and that could be done through something like impromptu networking. You have some people around certain questions. Right, by Ilka. Talk about. Discuss these
for hanging
things.
out.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Hope to see you again. Take care, guys. Thank you.
So that could be a way to check those assumptions and see if it's indeed true what you think. Yeah. Yeah, what I would need for you could fit in 2 hours together with impromptu networking, is about an hour. But yeah, could you move into that from just impromptu networking? Probably not. I think that you would need to assign some purpose first, I would say. Make sense? So you have impromptu networking to indeed test some assumptions and get some form of is getting to know each other, do a bit of socializing, so to say.
Yeah, there's a couple things that are sort of coming up. If we just sort of run with this notion of, all right, let's sort of build the relational fabric so that we can get to a space that will be conducive to have us answer these two hairy questions, which are, what direction are we going in? And how might we get there? I like the idea of, especially David, it's something that you mentioned in the idea about, to subvert the strategy, the invitation. So impromptu networking, what are the networks we need to build, right? This is just brilliant for some reason, right? And to use the basic, to use the structure of Conversation Cafe in order to respond to the invitation of about what conversations we need to have, just to surface all of that stuff and give us some scaffolding to create an opportunity space for that to sort of live and breathe. I think that would be a really good way in under an hour to build that sort of relational foundation. And then if I think about, okay, how do we put something on to maybe adjust or refine our sense of direction, like where are we going? I have some sense that this like appreciative interviews could work for that. There's also something so critical uncertainties somebody brought up. I think that could there's something about that that's really jumping out at me as well, of going, hey, this could sort of give us an opportunity to define the whole the whole playing field, all different types of statuses about where we might be at, because there's always one sort of Goldilocks space for critical uncertainties, right? There's always one sort of utopian view. So that could give us the opportunity to sort of define a sort of utopia, and also, develop coping strategies for wherever we find ourselves in not that utopia. And then thinking about, all right, that directionality. And wicked questions, I think, I've had really good luck. One of my favorite strings, the first string I ever actually used, was wicked questions into critical uncertainties. First to define the wicked question, and then use those as your two axes on critical uncertainties.
Yeah.
Could be a lot of fun. That'll take a little over an hour, but in sort of 2 hours space, depending on how you group things, you could definitely stick the landing. Impromptu networking, what kind of networks do we need to build? What conversations do we need to have happen? What are the sort of tensions and paradoxes that we're under to have those conversations and build those networks? And then to use those as the axis on critical uncertainties, and then to define and plan, to think about coping strategies for those. The only challenge I run into in that string is I'm missing sort of something in the end that sort of ties it all together on a bow and sort of gives us like, I lack the sense of like, oh, and now we have a plan that we're going to go and do, right?
What about writing that story from the future? So you picture your success, and then you write the story of how you got there. I like the idea that there's some reflection for this in the beginning and preparation, and there's like a spiral journal that sets up the impromptu networking and gets you to think slightly about what's gone on before this, like one thing I'd like to leave behind, and then gets you thinking about, a year from now, what will I describe as the major enabler of our success, so that you have thought about what will enable as opposed to disable or obstruct.
Yeah.
Hit me with that one more time. I'm sorry, Dave.
Yeah, that's right. I was saying, I like the idea that you might write something from the future that concentrates on enabling as the last thing, so that you're saying, how did we get to success? And that will embody some of the aspects of defining what success looks like, and also, leaving behind the past. And then I was saying, I think when you got interrupted there, was think about maybe doing some preparation reflection at the beginning, which is maybe a spiral journal that has one prompt that's about the past. Like, one thing I really hope I've left behind is, and then one thing a year from now that I think I'll be, and then it's kind of like just using that to get people thinking correctly about how to use the impromptu networking. Not getting stuck in the things that have made them frustrated, but asking them to pick one thing that they can communicate to other people. Because I think the genius of impromptu networking is that, or conversation cafe, is that the issues bubble out. They don't come from the top down. They come from the people that live the experience. And that's where the wisdom lives, and just by sharing it and letting everyone think about it, they're going to go, I'm not alone. Everybody saw the same thing I saw. Or they're going to say, wow, I hadn't thought of that, but that's really accurate. Or, you're a crackpot. Let's leave that guy alone. That's the risk you run. That's the risk you run, isn't it?
Yeah, I like this idea of sort of, so there's this element of sort of future present that I think you're describing in this letter from the future, right?
Yeah.
And in thinking about that, so yeah, there's and that, yeah, so there's, what I love about this idea as well is the way in which it creates some form of concrete artifact, right? So thinking about the way in which so I guess there's a, I'm gonna try and juxtapose it to something that I think is similar, that might provide an alternative. So I'm really, like I said, I'm obsessing about clean language, and this, I've literally listened to the audiobook from Contempt to Curiosity 3 times now in like the last week. And this question that sort of pops up about, what would you like to have happen in order to invite people to just define their ideal end scenario? And I love, the idea came to my mind of mating that model or that metaphor with something like drawing together, actually, to give people this shared language to create this, quite abstracted description of what they would like to have happen, and to effectively display those descriptions in a gallery walk, right? To just, basically put them up in the hall of like, hey, this is what we'd like to have happen. And because it's all done in this sort of very interpretive way that, just always ends up paying dividends, I think the same type of create an artifact and display them for other people to be influenced by in a sort of soft way could also be quite interesting, thinking about this, writing this letter from the future. That I would love to take those letters and basically just plaster them up and down the hall, so that at some point, a person completely unrelated to this particular topic has the opportunity to sort of walk by and be infected. I miss the good old days of information radiation in that sort of passive way, I notice. And I notice for right now, this question of, all right, if you had less time, what would you strip it down to? What if you could only, complex multi-stakeholder collaboration, everybody's busy. What if I can only squeeze 1 hour from these guys? What do you think would be the best use of it?
It's a tough one. You don't want to leave things too open, especially for people like this. Don't want to say, okay, yeah, we got this, and it's really nice, but to really make something of it, we would need to have another hour of discussion somewhere else or so. So we want to bring something that is usable and actionable for them. that's not so easy. Yeah.
Yeah, the question then, it's funny. Yeah, so this notion of purpose, I think, is crazy essential, actually. Because if I think about stripping anything down, then I come back to like my min spec of anything strategic is where are we going? How are we going to get there?
Yeah.
And as much as I might want to jump into this super practical of like, how are we going to get there, guys? Like this question of, well, where are we going actually? So however we might conceive to re-clarify or to check, because I'm sure there's some purpose statement that was put out like for this group at some point. I'm sure that they did some form of like, hey, this is where we're going to go. So what might be a relatively low-key way of just evaluating if that still is it, or if there's something else that's needed?
Yes.
Yeah, that I might just then get into, and this could be super frustrating given the sense that Nick brought in, but I might just do what, so what, now what? Like literally,
Yeah.
like this was our purpose statement. Is it working for us? What's your evidence? What is your inference? What is the impact of this of your observation of this
Yeah.
the functionality of this purpose statement?
Yeah.
I might even contextualize that, where are we going and how are we going to get there? I might worry less about how we're going to get there and more about how will we know we're getting there.
Great.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking that direction too, yeah.
Because if we know, if we agree on the evidence base for yeah, we're getting there, then then we cannot argue about how we're doing it until we start seeing what evidence the methods produce. It's just like we pick a system or we pick a method, and a lot of times the loyalties get distorted according to those lines as opposed to what's actually working.
Mhm.
And it almost seems like that is the key question in Nick's scenario, is like to get the group to say what is working, what is producing evidence that we're reaching our purpose, that we're doing our purpose. And if there's no agreement on that, it's just this doesn't feel comfortable, this feels uncomfortable, this doesn't feel nurturing, this feels like we're working across purposes, we're just ticking boxes or whatever. And to move beyond that, you have to get that shared purpose. Then there's a context for everyone to succeed together, as opposed to a zero-sum game where, some people succeed and some people don't.
Yeah.
And what I like about a min spec for this as well, so coming back to this question of where are we going and how we know if we're getting there, that also, like in terms of that may not feel very satisfying in some ways, that we haven't created a big fucking action plan. But what I have done is given the group something that, okay, now go back into your context and to keep an eye out for this stuff so that we can next time do this, like this very straightforward evaluation on, look, what are we noticing is actually ticking the boxes right there? How are we doing actually, right?
I think that's really good. And if you combine the min spec with the Ecocycle, just for the last 20 minutes, if you said, these are the minimum things that we need to do, and let's use this from now on. This is our reporting mechanism. Every time we get together, we take the min-spec elements and we use the Ecocycle and we say, are they still where last time we talked about it? You know, and there's no place on that Ecocycle that isn't intentional. Every single movement that we make is going to be something that we're intending to do in the service of our purpose. Because the whole Ecocycle, if we move everything where it needs to be, then we'll be making our purpose. And then you've kind of turned the reporting into the accountability into challenging and coaching and creating together, as opposed to, you know, beating each other up for not making a deadline or whatever. And I like that, finishing that up with either what now, what, so what, or with Wimpy each time doing a different thing, so that you're practicing a skill that is encouraging collaboration on the way out the door. You're getting that every time.
Yeah, that feels really interesting, right? This idea of, all right, so a very stripped down session of, you know, where are we going actually, and how are we going to get there? How are we going to know that we're getting there? When I think about that particular question about how we're going to know when we get there, I think critical uncertainties is actually a very appropriate structure to answer that question, because we will have some description of what the reality is like in these other situations. So that might be the most stripped down sort of thing I could be, to use that idea of critical uncertainties to define this situation, send people out into the wild to figure out what which context they're sort of in, and then come back together, you know, and do some observational analysis, plotting that to the Ecocycle, and then min-specking all right, the now what, to change things. Well, all right. I mean, there you go, Nick. That's all you have to do, my friend. I'm cognizant that as we're crossing the time boundary. Thanks, guys, for your time, attention, and energy. Good hanging out again.
Yep.
I'll be uploading this guy to YouTube so Nick can see the additional work we had to say. We didn't put in a lot of attention into that. What would I do if I had more time? But I think the accumulative consequence of everything we described is that kind of the answer to that in some way.
Yeah. I might actually consider saying, even if you have more time, you might not want to use it. Keep it short.
What was that, David?
Well, I was just going to say, I think there's 2 hours worth of stuff in the drawing, and you could drop one thing out in every quadrant and cut it down to an hour, you know, or you could say, let's keep it dense and we'll have another meeting, whatever feels right.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, sure.
that's a great suggestion in terms of what you could cut out. You just could cut out the coping strategies for critical uncertainties, something like that, and just say, describe the scenarios, and then send people out in the wild to go, which one of these scenarios did you most recognize? And that could be a really good, like, here, you know, sort of a very action-based research. Righteous. Well, thanks, fellas. We'll see you in the next time.
Yep, thanks a lot. Have a nice day.
See you around, guys. All right. Well, my name's Jeremy Akers, Jeremy Nathaniel Akers. That's been this Valentine's Day edition of the Wise Crowd's Liberating Structures design call. I hope that was insightful and useful. Sorry if we didn't unpack many of these things to a sufficient degree. I'll try and link to explanations of each of these structures that we sort of pointed out in the video notes. And let me know what you thought. And come join us. See you next Monday. Yeah, now I gotta click the button. Think I clicked the button. Actually click